And on the fourth day, we get a phone call saying, the Department of Justice has decided that we're going to dismiss all of the charges in the interest of justice against everyone. There was no wrongdoing that happened. In 2016, when I came, I was at the time running a company up in Orange County, an Inc. 500 Deloitte Technology Fast 500 company. We'd been doing what we were doing for about 8 years. Had 3 years of audited financials. We're gearing up to go public. Had this amazing board of directors, from the former Secretary of Health and Human Services and someone from CVS and the Chief Compliance Officer from the Cleveland Clinic. And we were gearing up to do some great things. Had a team of about 300 people. We're doing about 30 million in revenue. We're doing about 45 million in 2017. And then in 2019, when I came back, I shared about the destruction that happened in 2017 based on a bunch of false allegations. So I have a nice little picture there of a bank robbery because I felt that the company was stolen from me. And then now in 2023, kind of reflecting on the final vindication of Proove and what happened. And I'm going to share with you some of the lessons learned and some of the next steps that we're doing. Okay, so I'm just going to give you kind of a quick recap of what happened. We actually had indictments come out since we last spoke, and then a vindication and just some of the lessons learned. So let's hop right into it. So May 2019, that's me back then, basically talking about how disgruntled ex-employees that had been fired had spread lies to the media, which then ultimately resulted in a government inquiry. So if you could flip to the next slide. So this was a slide that I showed back then. And I know the guy with the camera is going to hate this, but I'm going to stand up because I do need to pace a little bit. And so at the time, in December 2016, we were at 278 employees. We were occupying, if you know where Axonics campus is now, that was the Proove Biosciences campus in the Irvine Spectrum area. They're now in both of our buildings there. We were operating a CLIA CAP accredited laboratory. We were doing a lot of testing. We were cash flow positive, winning lots of awards, doing some really interesting things. And we were very excited for what 2017 was going to hold for us. We felt it was a year that we would either get acquired or go public. After, as many of you know that have built companies beforehand, those 8 years for me were my oldest son's Nicholas 8 to 16. It was Elizabeth's, let's see, it would have been 5 to 13, and it was William's like 2 to 10 years of age. And so it was an important aspect of my life and the amount of time I spent building this company. If you flip to the next slide. Then 8 months later, in August 2017, about a little over a month after receiving a subpoena for documents that the government reported as our offices being raided by the FBI, having a second hit piece from a reporter in Stat News who had been fired by the LA Times and a bunch of other places, regurgitating all of these lies. We ended up having a 90% reduction in revenue. So we were down to $180,000 in revenue monthly. Reimbursements were put on hold. We ended up having to fire most of our employees. Couldn't cut costs fast enough. There are actually laws on what percentage of your employees you can fire. I learned about that because I'd never gone through that beforehand. And ultimately made a bad decision, but at the time it seemed like a good decision, to put the company into a receivership to restructure the business. Unfortunately, I came to learn that a receiver becomes God. And even though I owned 72.7% of the business because I had funded it myself, and I was the CEO of it, I lost control of the business, and they ultimately liquidated the business in a matter of months. So, on the bright side, let's flip to the next slide. So then what happened after that? Well, I had PTSD, as I'm sure you can imagine. Went to therapy for the first time in my life, went on an antidepressant the first time in my life. It was rough. I think it was the first time my kids saw me cry. And it was really, really hard to go through. So with a couple of the C-level executives from my team, we started a social impact investment group called Proove Ventures to basically help other entrepreneurs that were trying to do good things in the world. To this day, we still had the only technology in the literature that could accurately predict who would misuse opioids. And with 96.7% accuracy. We also had the only technology in the literature that could do that and reduce chronic pain by 50%. And so we wanted to help other people that were trying to do good things in the healthcare system. And so for the past 5.5 years, we've had Profound Ventures, and we've done that. Well, then out of the blue, we see a press release come out from the Justice Department, right down the road here at the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Diego, saying that a 1099 sales distributor from Proove Biosciences had signed off on a plea agreement and pled guilty to wrongdoing. I didn't hear about this. No one on my team heard about it. Our attorneys didn't hear about it, but a press release pops up, and we're like, uh-oh. And so we obviously look into this. Obviously, we came to learn later on that this person had done some bad things after Proove. And because the government had exhausted so many resources looking into Proove and found nothing wrong, they wrote up a plea agreement. The guy was never indicted, and he signed off on the plea agreement. And when they did his 427 interview with the FBI, they said, did this happen? Yes. Did this happen? Yes. Did this happen? Yes. And all of his answers were just yes. He didn't explain anything because he was just getting off on a plea agreement. So, shockingly, out of the blue, last year, I, along with several other executives from Proove Biosciences and physician executives at National Spine and Pain Center, which is the largest private equity-owned roll-up of pain management clinics in the United States, were indicted. So after 5 years, the same AUSA, someone who I have a lot of affection for, his name was Josh Green, as well as the head FBI agent, Leah Chambers, they couldn't find anything wrong. They end up getting an indictment against all the people listed there on the left-hand side, based upon this one particular former sales distributor's accusations. If you could flip to the next slide. So what was the accusation of wrongdoing? What was the indictment around? The suggestion was, and Josh Green, who was the AUSA, didn't have any healthcare experience. So for those in the room that have healthcare experience, you're going to hear this and be like, say what? They were accusing you of doing wrongdoing for that? We had a research agreement with the corporation National Spine and Pain Center. In that research agreement, everything was predicated on fair market value, et cetera, IRB approved study. And the accusation was if you're contracted with a hospital or with a medical group, and that hospital or medical group is also doing commercial business with you, that's conspiracy to commit fraud. Okay. And then the second allegation was that by paying that corporation or that hospital for research services, and then that hospital or medical group also ordering your medication, your device, your diagnostic test, your digital health tool, that's an anti-kickback statute violation. Of course, we explained to them that this is usual and customary in healthcare. It happens all the time. Large pharmaceutical companies do this. Device companies do this. Diagnostic companies do this. But Josh Green had only prosecuted drug cartels in Mexico and never had worked in healthcare beforehand. And we all know how complicated the anti-kickback statute is and Stark issues and those type of things. And he honestly did not know what he was doing. Next slide. So the study that we did with National Spine and Pain, we were actually really proud about. We weren't hiding it. It was listed on clinicaltrials.gov. It was approved by an IRB. We did a press release on the results, and we had amazing results. 92% of the patients that were enrolled in the study had an average pain reduction of 40%, which is more than the minimal clinically important difference in pain, which is about 30%. 73% of the patients had favorable responses to the treatments following the changes that were made based on the predictive algorithms that we had. And when you ultimately looked at it, there were about a certain number of patients that were rated as high risk for misusing opioids. We were able to move them over to non-opioid treatment modalities and achieve a similar analgesic response. So we were really, really happy with the results. Next slide. So was Medicare when we met with them. But the Department of Justice down the road here, before they did their subpoena or their indictment, never spoke with the folks at CMS. And so here's an example. So I came to learn what an indictment was and all this type of stuff. I had gotten speeding tickets and parking tickets beforehand, but nothing ever like this. And so in an indictment around conspiracy to commit fraud against Medicare, they have to put together things that are called overt acts, or here's our best evidence as to why you did something wrong. Well, here's an example of some of their strongest evidence. Overt act number 6. On April 25th, 2014, defendant Gordon, that's Dr. Asaf Gordon, who's the chief compliance officer for National Spine and Pain Center, emailed defendants Meshkin and Kendall. I'm Meshkin, and Dan Kendall was the principal investigator on the study, to recommend to defendant Meshkin that Proove recruit defendant Cherik. Abe Cherik is a doctor at National Spine and Pain Center, to promote Proove. Defendant Gordon encouraged defendant Meshkin to purchase defendant Cherik some great Washington Nationals baseball tickets. Well, so the overt act of wrongdoing was Dr. Gordon suggesting that I should buy Dr. Cherik some baseball tickets. That was their example, their evidence of committing fraud. Well, what they don't tell you, because if you notice there, the only word in quotes that's actually quoted from what was said is the word great. Everything else is written by Josh Green, who doesn't know anything about healthcare. Dr. Gordon sent me an email and said, hey, as we're going beyond the research study and getting to a point where we're going to be using your technology, Dr. Cherrick is probably the most respected diagnostician amongst our 120 clinics. If you can get him to buy off in your predictive analytics, a lot of other people will follow. And he happens to have a child with autism, and he takes him every year to the St. Louis Cardinals spring training, and they bring him down on the field, and they're so good to his son, and so he has a real warm spot for baseball. So maybe you can take him to a baseball game. Of course, I responded to him. I really appreciate you telling me about his son with autism. I used to serve on a school board, did a lot of good things for kids with autism. I can talk with him about that, but I can't buy him baseball tickets. That's against our compliance guidelines and the AdvaMed guidelines, and I can't do that. But I appreciate the heads up about his kid with autism, and I'll make sure I reach out to him and talk with him about that. So the mere fact that he suggested I take him to a baseball game was evidence of a conspiracy to defraud Medicare. That was about as good as they could do.
Never occurred.
Never occurred. But that's conspiracy. All right, so let's go ahead and flip the slide. All right, so they didn't have one piece of evidence. They literally provided us with 6 5-inch binders of exhibits, because during the subpoena, we gave them copies of every email, every server, every piece of data, and there wasn't one thing in there. Our attorneys, which was a unified defense, we all worked together. We went through every single piece of paper, every single one, and there wasn't one thing that I wouldn't want on the cover of the Los Angeles Times. Not one thing. I was so proud of our team because I was worried. I was like, 300 employees. Could somebody say something really stupid or do something wrong? And then I'm going to have to suffer for that. No, there wasn't one thing that was there. In fact, the whole allegation was the reason we were doing this study was somehow to defraud Medicare. And there's literally an email in there from me to them suggesting that we don't even have anybody over 65 years of age in the particular study. So, they had no mens rea, they had no intention, they had nothing. And then there was awful abuses of power. And this started from the very, very beginning. As I shared with you last time when we ended up getting a subpoena, we had already been reaching out to them based upon the Pillar article saying, hey, if you guys have any concerns with these articles, they're completely untrue, we'd be happy to meet with you. Out of the 10 FBI agents that ultimately came and collected all the information on the subpoena, we got 7 of them disqualified for breaking the law. We got the U.S. attorney here, Randy Grossman, disqualified for breaking the law. We did a host of different things, but they were very, very aggressive. A lot of things you see on TV about potential abuses of power within government or the Department of Justice or FBI, I've lived it firsthand. So we've literally had 427 interviews, which is where they interview you at gunpoint, and they say, did this happen? Did this happen? And it's amazing what people say when there's a gun pointed at them. When they gave us, there's a particular law, it's called the Brady Law, it's Brady v. Maryland, a Supreme Court case, that basically says that the government, when you ask them as a defendant, they have to give you basically all of their evidence and anything that would be exculpatory that basically says the person's innocent. Well, when they gave us all those electronic files, they were so gracious that they renamed all the files and they put the word FU actually spelled out, I wasn't going to put that on the slide, in all the file names to us. So we thought that that was really professional, so we sent them a letter back and said, we're just a little curious as to why all the file names have FU in them. Did you mean something by that? So a host of different things that were just really embarrassing. As someone who's been an elected official and raised my hand to take the oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States, I was embarrassed for them. Then there were numerous violations of attorney-client privilege. They literally tried to make the argument that because the company ceased operations, that the company no longer had attorney-client privilege, which there's plenty of case law around that, how that's totally false. And so then we looked at our witness list, and they had to produce witness lists. So they had the drunk distributor who we had terminated, who then came and signed a plea agreement. They had the 2 whistleblowers that had filed whistleblower lawsuits that had been dismissed in the federal courts because they didn't meet the civil evidentiary threshold, so they somehow thought it would meet a higher criminal threshold. And they had 1 other disgruntled employee. That was their all-star witness list. Who did we have? Former Secretary of Health and Human Services, former head of Medicare, presidents of the American Society of Interventional Pain Physicians, the American Academy of Pain Medicine, et cetera, as well as executives, employees, even patients. We had an all-star panel of witnesses. So if you'd flip the slide. slide. So December 15, 2022 finally comes. So you get this indictment, and I'm literally looking at this document, and it literally says, United States of America v. Brian Meshkin et al. And I'm like, wow, that's really embarrassing. That's a huge fall from grace to actually see your name like that. And so we were a unified defense. We finally got to the point where we could fight back, where we could actually say something. Because you'll see this a lot happen, but there's, for example, Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart was accused of insider trading, but she wasn't put in jail for insider trading. What she was put in jail for is she went to the media, went to Good Morning America and the Today Show and others, and she defended herself. And as she was out there defending herself, there was a little bit of a discrepancy in what she was saying to the media versus what she had said to the FBI. And so they indicted her for lying to a federal agent and put her in jail for that. And this happens on a regular basis, this type of scenario. And so for the past 6 years, I haven't been able to say too much. The only thing I ever said was literally at this conference, and that was because my attorneys allowed me to do that. But I hadn't been able to say anything to fight back against all of this. And so we finally filed 30 pretrial motions against all of the abuses of power, saying, how could you possibly get an indictment without any evidence of wrongdoing or a witness to any wrongdoing? Just people saying, oh, I think this happened, I think this happened. And we finally got a hearing on December 15, 2022, before Judge Staten. It was moved up to the Central District in Los Angeles. And she looked at all of this and she's like, in my career, I've never seen anything like this before. Thankfully, we had a smart judge. You don't always get that. And so she looked at it, and we were basically arguing that this has just been a tremendous abuse of power. And we were asking for an evidentiary hearing where we could call all the prosecutors and the FBI agents and put them on the stand to account for their actions. Because the attorneys representing us were so pissed they wanted to pull their bar licenses and everything. And the judge was like, well, before we do that, let's give the government a chance to defend themselves. Because she's like, I don't understand how you could possibly ever get an indictment in this situation, how you could have even gotten the subpoena in the first place, because there was no probable cause. And we're now at this point in time where literally we're a month away from trial. Everybody on the prosecution team that's left and the FBI agents that are left submit written sworn declarations under penalty of perjury to explain how you got to this point. And we were like, okay, this is going to be interesting because they're going to have to write down what they believe to be the truth, and then we can use that against them. She gave them 4 days to do it, and on the fourth day, we get a phone call saying, the Department of Justice has decided that we're going to dismiss all of the charges in the interest of justice against everyone. There was no wrongdoing that happened. So the very next day, I get a phone call. It was like 9:45 p.m. at night. Very next day, I get a phone call from my attorney saying, Brian, we got great news. And it was really a wonderful holiday present. I was honestly looking forward to really making them look bad at court, but I was really, really happy that they put their tail between their legs and they went away. The AUSA, who was the person who was behind this, Josh Green, not that I don't want to say his name a bunch, but I have no problem doing so, was ultimately fired by the Department of Justice here in San Diego in January. He was the chief of the fraud division here, and he was fired and now works for a little nonprofit auto fraud center suing dealerships for lemon laws as an associate, not even a partner. So he's working under the supervision of another attorney after 17 years of the Department of Justice, which is a very peculiar career move. Next slide. So ultimately, we got some media coverage on the vindication here in the San Diego Union Tribune, sorry, the Orange County Business Journal, and other places that we were ultimately able to be vindicated and beat Goliath with just a few little stones. Josh Green, that's his picture on the Auto Fraud Center there. Good for him. He's now an associate after 17 years. And so one of the challenges that all the attorneys afterwards were talking about was, we got to prevent this guy from hurting other people. And they wanted to do an investigation with the state bar and that type of thing. I'm not a conflict person. That's not my nature to be spiteful. I even looked him up and saw he had 3 young kids, and I was just like, I don't want to hurt his kids. And then out of the blue, he gets fired. So I was very happy that the system took care of him, so he's not going to bully or hurt anybody else in the future. So looking back on the experience, what did I learn? The F word, but not what you think. You know, a lot of people say, boy, you got F'd really, really badly. And we did. But I think there's some other F words that are a little more salient than that one. We're all familiar with the story of David and Goliath. David's this little guy, and he gets these 5 stones out of the river. It only took the first one for him to do his job, but I'm going to share with you 5 little nuggets, 5 little stones, if you will, that we use to defeat Goliath. First is the force of fake news, and this is something that I talked about last time. Ultimately, what destroyed the business started with the spread of fake news, and as I shared last time, in 2016, 2017, and 2018, the dictionary every year chooses words of the year. In those 3 years, it chose post-truth, fake news, and misinformation as words of the year, reflecting changes in the English language as well as our culture. So negative information spreads 6 times as fast. So you have to respond. If you're running a company, the old adage of Mark Twain that you don't go to war with people that make ink by the gallon is no longer true. You have to fight back. As much as you may not like the guy, the former president of the United States, when people would make an accusation against them, he brought a machine gun to a knife fight. And he would hit back hard, whether it was over Twitter or whatever it was, and he didn't put up with it. And that's unfortunately the world in which we live in now. A lot of people say, oh, the truth eventually comes out. Not true. The truth is an inanimate object for all intents and purposes. It is not going to come out unless someone tells it. And it's very, very hard when you're dealing with a government inquiry because you can't go out there and tell the truth because then they will indict you for going out and talking about it. So you have to make sure the truth comes out. And I'm just very grateful now that we've had the positive media coverage to set the record straight. The other thing that I learned through the process is in the court of public opinion, you are guilty until proven innocent. It's been a fascinating 5.5 years, for sure. You know, you go from being an earthly angel in the newspapers for all the things that you've done, and the CEO of the year, and EY Entrepreneur of the Year, and all these various different things, to now you're the CEO of a scandal-ridden company investigated by the government. It's like, oh, man. And so I've had a scarlet letter on me for the past 5.5 years. So it's been really hard financially. Personally, went through a divorce after 20 years. Just it was ugly, ugly situation, completely unnecessary. And that's just my life. That's not the life of the other 300 employees at Proove, all of which were harmed. All of the vendors that worked with us, our partners, patients that suffered, doctors. Just it's amazing how bad, you hear that of the 10 Commandments not bearing false witness. I had no idea how destructive that could be. Next slide, please. Facts. All right, we live in a post-truth world, so facts really don't make a difference at the beginning. Obviously, don't break the law. That's important. We didn't break the law, so that worked out well. A lot of times when the DOJ shows up, if you've broken the law, they're going to find it, and you're going to pay a fine, and something's going to happen. But you don't even want to have the appearance of doing so. If the DOJ comes looking, obviously they usually find something. We were the exception to the rule because we had every T crossed and I dotted. There was no there. But perception is reality. So as you think about things, think about how it could be perceived in a negative way, because people will pay attention to that. The joke I made earlier about Joe and someone stopping to look at an accident. People will slow down for someone in an accident on the side of the road faster than they will slow down for someone just walking on the side of the road. We are attracted to negativity as human beings. It's just human nature. And so perception is reality. Next slide, please. Next F word, family and friends, is something I learned. In prosperity, your friends and family know you. In adversity, you know who your friends and family are. It's definitely a big difference. And when you're thinking about some of these challenges, in the healthcare field, it's highly regulated. I think it's really, really important to plan for it and think about how to handle these things to prevent it from happening. I'm probably going to write a book on it because I've learned so much of this process. But the challenges like this can affect your family, and they can affect the family of everybody involved. And so it's really, really important to be able, in this new world that we live in now, where people, when there's a respiratory flu or virus that's out there and they stock up on toilet paper because they can't figure out their head from their rear end, it's the world in which we live in. And so you need to be prepared that misinformation can really be very, very damaging. Next slide. Next F word, fight or flight feelings. All right, so fight or flight is a natural physiological response to stress. When the situation is really bad, generally you just want to run away and hide from it. I know I certainly felt that way. But in this particular situation where you've got people who may be making false attacks, you have to fight. You have to. You have to fight back. You have to get lawyers involved. You have to fight back. If it's a disgruntled ex-employee, it's a competitor, it's someone in the media, it's a blogger, it's a review on Yelp, on Google, whatever it is, you have to hit back hard. And for yourself, in preparing for the stress, having built companies and been a serial entrepreneur, you really have to engage in behaviors every day to learn how to handle stress, because it is very, very stressful. And so whatever your persuasion is relaxation and mindfulness. I pray multiple times a day. I'm very religious and practicing my religious faith. Physical activity, critical, like exercise. And then having some type of social support, people that you can talk through, which is called the buffering theory, is really, really important. Next one. Faith over fear. It's definitely been a Job-like experience for me for the past 5.5 years. I would be lying to you if I didn't tell you I was scared at the very beginning of this. I really was. I thought that the cops, or every time I heard a police like siren down the road, I thought they were potentially coming to my house. And my attorneys had scared the bejesus out of me, saying, you know, this AUSA really hates your guts. He literally could show up with the FBI agents and drag you out of your house with media there, making it seem like they're arresting you, and then when the media leaves, they just let you go back in your house. And that literally is legal for them to do. Personally, I can tell you from my faith, if you're familiar with the story in the Old Testament of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, where there was a fourth person standing there by them in the fire, that happened for me. I can personally testify to that, that I am so grateful for my Savior and the fact that he was there with me carrying crosses that I don't have the strength to be able to carry. One of the things I also learned from this experience is which letter will you choose, E or I? When you go through something like this, you can choose to be bitter or you can choose to be better. And it's just an exchange of one vowel versus another. A lot of people will become bitter. They'll become angry, spiteful, think less of whatever. But as someone who exercises on a fairly regular basis, I don't become stronger unless I'm lifting heavy things. You may have the same experience yourself. And for whatever reason, sometimes we're asked to lift some pretty heavy things, and this felt really, really heavy. But you have to make a choice as to how you're going to handle it. And I hope I've become better through the process. The things that worked for me were my religious faith more than anything else. Reading the scriptures every day. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and so I go to the temple every week. I do whatever I can to feel as close to God as possible with all of my inadequacies and shortcomings. And that's honestly what's helped me work through this. I knew that I was going to be vindicated at some point in time. I just didn't know how. And when the indictment came out, I was like, okay, well, I guess this is how it's going to happen. And that faith kept me from killing myself, because otherwise I probably would have blew my brains out. Next slide. All right, so looking forward, what's next? Next slide. The Proove effect. This is data from the CDC's website, if you go to their website. This is 20 years of the opioid abuse crisis. As a numbers guy, you can pretty much draw a tangent type line there and see that it goes up. However, there was only a small period of time where it actually flattened out or went down. And that was when Proove was at its apex. We've done the only thing that's been able to decrease or flatten out the opioid abuse crisis. And big shocking surprise, once Proove was gone, we've now doubled the number of, well, actually almost tripled now, the amount of people that are dying from overdoses on any opioid in the United States. In 2021, it was 80,000, and I just heard last week it was 110,000 last year. The government created this problem. The government's worsened the problem, and just going after Proove was just one of the many stupid things that the government has done that's cost a lot of people their lives, and it's unfortunate. So to that end, next slide. If 2016 Proove, that business, was operating in 2022, if I had that magic wand, and some of you heard me say this beforehand, because of all the new billing codes that Medicare invented, because of all the cost savings we drove for them, we would have done $900 million in revenue in 2022 versus the $29.6 million we did in 2016 because of the new codes. That sounds like a pretty attractive value proposition. Next slide. So to that end, I'm going to continue with my life's journey. I'm going to continue to help others in various ways. I've got my consulting company where I help with people. I'm going to write a book about this experience, just help other people that are trying to do good things in the healthcare system that's very broken. With the beauty and the ashes of what was left, because I still have the data, the software, obviously the band wants to get back together again of our team. I'm going to relaunch Proove Genomics in the next 3 to 6 months, as well as have additional lab space for additional laboratory technologies. And the whole Proove operation of proving and tracking the outcomes, we're going to launch that whole outcomes monitoring division as well, contracting with device, diagnostic, digital, and therapeutics companies that need a kind of a site management organization specifically in orthopedics and in pain that can monitor those outcomes, track those outcomes, and demonstrate that clinical utility, really the so what, if you will. And so that's what I'm going to be doing now that my name's been cleared and we can move forward. There's obviously a huge gap, and so that's what I'm going to be doing. So next slide, I think, is it. Yep. Thank you all so much.
perfectly on time, and I'm going to have us go over a little because do you feel it? Do you feel the love in the room? You're talking about friends and family?
Yeah, no, I appreciated your support through all this. It's definitely been one of the harder things I've dealt with. I think it really sucked. It was really hard on my kids. Really hard on my kids. As a dad, you feel, you feel, I don't know, you feel like you fail when you can't protect your kids. And it was really, really hard on my kids, which sucks. That really ticks me off. But it is what it is. You know, it's life. So.
How old are they?
Now they are 22, 19, and 16.
So at the time
21,
it would have been 10?
16, 14, and 11. Yep. And they saw their dad profusely crying on June 7, 2017 when that subpoena came. Yeah, it was not a good day in the Meshkin household.
Would you say that, how directly would you associate your divorce with this event?
Oh, it definitely played a big role for sure. I mean, handwriting was on the wall for a while, but that definitely played a role, which is a shame. But like my oldest son, Nicholas, he was always like my straight arrow and just had this really high sense of justice. He was always like a leader in everything, would fight for the underdog, just good kid. And his heart was so broken by this. He was like, Dad, this just goes to show you the good guy gets screwed. You know, you should have gone after all these people with these false allegations and sued their pants off and blah, 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 blah. And it really rocked his faith. It was really hard on him. And
where is he now?
He's the one that struggled the most with it. And he was probably the one I was closest to. And he was the one who always come to the office and those type of things. So he unfortunately went down the pathway of kind of self-medicating with some marijuana and alcohol and those type of things. And but he's here in Orange County, and he's working and taking some classes and those type of things. Two younger ones have handled it a little bit better, but it really, really rocked him. Really
how many? Remind me, how many employees were displaced?
298. And that's just our company. That's not like all the vendors that worked with us. And, you know, it's an ecosystem.
What was help me visualize the device, the concept that flattened the curve that year?
Oh, so basically what we would do is, as a clinician, the people we contracted with, whether it was USC or National Spine and Pain Center or UNC Chapel Hill, the organizations we worked with, they basically would collect a DNA specimen with a buccal swab, and then we would collect all of these validated assessments on the patients up front, because EHR data is garbage. You know, in the U.S. healthcare system, we have coding for diagnosis, ICD. We have coding for procedure, CPT, but there's no coding for outcomes, and so there's no way really to pull that type of data out of an EHR. And most EHR data is charge capture, and so it's perverted by reimbursement. And so we would collect all these functional assessments based upon what the patient was experiencing. If it was a low back pain, we do an Oswestry Disability Index. If it was a knee issue, we do a WOMAC, various different things, physiological, vital sign measures, functional measures, psychological issues like PHQ-9, GAD-7, quality of life, SF-12, those type of things, and all the treatments they were taking, have them rate those, collect the side effects, all that type of stuff. And then we would combine all of that data with the genetic information. So it's not a nature versus a nurture, but it's a nature and a nurture calculation. And then we would deliver to the doctors an objective assessment of how they felt pain, because some people have a very high threshold for pain. Some people have a low threshold for pain. People feel pain in different ways.
This data that you collect, is it self-entered into a computer or an assessment, self-assessment?
So we would put patient engagement representatives, what we call them, into the hospitals and the doctor's offices to do it, because you can't really ask an MA or that type of thing. They're overworked and underpaid, or at least they feel that way.
So there's another human asking them.
Yeah.
I mean,
interviewing, connecting with them.
Show me on these faces how much pain kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And they would go through and they would complete the assessment with the patient in an interview type situation. And we'd pull other data out of the EHR. And then we provide an upfront assessment. And then we would prove what would happen. So, you know, LabCorp and Quest, they do lots of laboratory tests, but they have no idea what a doctor does with it, nor do they know if a patient gets better or not. In fact, they really don't care. They just want medical necessity, pay me, move on. That's their business. That was not our business. And so we would have every doctor document exactly how they use the test. It had to be documented in the EHR, and they had to send us a copy from the EHR to hold them accountable. Because if they're not accountable, they're not going to use the information, and then the insurance company is going to tell us it's worthless. So we needed to hold them accountable. And then we would track the patients every single month. So we would look at those same functional assessments and psychological assessments, et cetera, on a monthly basis. And vital
how is
signs
that gathered?
by us. So we would pay for all of this. We paid for all of it. So out of the $29.6 million in revenue we had in 2016, $5.4 million of our OpEx was in the Proove infrastructure of tracking it, which has now become chronic care management, remote patient monitoring, remote therapy monitoring, all those things.
But it's remote. You don't need another human in the room talking with this person.
Well, for like chronic care management and those type of things, they still will do an interview over the phone or that type of thing to collect information. But then you can collect stuff off now. There's devices and peripherals and those type of things that didn't exist back then to the same degree. And
which you would not manufacture. You're strictly in the data.
We were strictly in the data business.
Okay.
And in the human connection. Because when you sit down with somebody and you say, hey, Joe, you've been struggling with this for a while. We're going to try to really figure out what's going on and figure out what's going to work for you. And we're going to stay in touch with you. And because things are going to change in your life. People go through things, divorces, your business getting blown up by the government, you get indicted, whatever it may be.
Whatever happens.
Those stresses affect your health.
Yeah.
Those aren't the things that doctor asks you in the 30 seconds they ask you questions about your health. But life affects health.
I'm trying to understand, this data goes someplace.
It goes into our servers. Right.
So that you flatten the,
Yeah. So then we analyze and assess all that, machine learning, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
You can bastardize the term AI. It really wasn't AI.
We'll have some AI talks. I saw everybody walk in.
And then we would provide the reports back to the doctor up front and then update them every single month so that the doctor understood what to do up front, how to change treatment, and then if life happens, someone gets a divorce, someone has a sickness, child dies, dog dies, whatever it is, it's going to affect your health.
So if this is a pharmacological decision that the doctor will likely make that will steer
or other
away from opioids?
Or other treatment modalities. So there's multimodal ways of treating pain.
Would the doctor traditionally have been prescribing opioids without the information?
Or something else, yeah.
And now they will have a better answer than an opioid.
Correct. Most of science, because it's done by doctors of philosophy, PhDs, is reductionist in theory. I'm a math guy, so I don't really like deductive reasoning. To me, that's pointless. I wouldn't go to a restaurant and order everything on the menu to taste it to figure out what I want to order. That's how we practice science. I'm an inductive reasoner. I use math to be able to figure things out, like you would in placing a bet in Vegas or buying a stock. It's a mathematical calculation, not reductionist. You'd never want to have a scientific, PhD doing your stock purchasing because they would buy everything, and then let's try it out and see. And well, that didn't work. Okay, we'll sell that stock. And so we would provide that inductive reasoning and say, prescribe this medication, use this treatment modality, do this combination of things, avoid this, and we'd give them that information. And when they acted on the information, which was about 50% of the time, patients had a 90% reduction in their pain within 30 days. It would persist beyond 12 months. And we completely eliminate any incidents of opioid abuse. And for those people that were on opioids already, because their primary care doctor prescribed it, their orthopedic surgeon prescribed it post-surgery or whatever, we could move those that were at high risk off of opioids onto something else and have a statistically similar response in pain relief.
Does anyone in the room have know a person or a friend of or a relative of that has died from opioid abuse? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we would have had another guest in the room today had his nephew not died last week of, they suspect, fentanyl. Right. Which I don't understand fentanyl. I don't understand it. Is it just like the cheapest possible ingredient that people are taking deliberate poison and putting it in there?
So most people that get anesthesia get fentanyl. So if fentanyl is not an illegal drug, the Duragesic patch, which is used for palliative care in cancer patients, that's fentanyl. That's a J&J product when I was at Johnson & Johnson. And so what's happened is the government, in its infinite wisdom, basically has created a lose-lose proposition. For people that are at risk for misusing opioids, we're not going to give them treatment. We are going to label them, have that stigma associated with it, and they're not going to get ethical opioids, so they're going to go on the streets for illegal. For patients that have chronic pain, we're going to taper all of them off opioids because the inanimate object of the opioid is wrong. And so now 1 out of every 10 suicides in the United States is a chronic pain patient blowing their brains out, or they go to something illegal because they need some type of pain relief. So that's what the government's done, which is why that thing has gone up as much as it has, because no offense to any lawyers in the room, but you have a bunch of lawyers in a legislature practicing medicine, and that's just not a good idea.
We'll take one question. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, Chris Pikarski.
Chris.
I saw you in 2019.
Yeah, good to see you again.
I'm so happy to hear the outcome. My questions were going to be, what treatment modalities do you recommend? But let me tell you, since I saw you last, I have CRPS type 2.
I'm so sorry.
I'm on max dosage of opioids right now, and I am struggling to get care through my medical, professionals. And I'm like, oh my God, this would be so helpful.
Yeah.
And so, I mean,
and the doctors who are prescribing them to you, even though the system and the doctors and the government demonizes them, they're actually heroes.
Yes.
Because they're helping someone who's in excruciating pain. And for anyone who's ever had a loved one, and Chris, you can probably speak to this, it affects your sleep, it affects your mood, it affects your work, it affects all aspects of your life. Chronic pain is a ubiquitous health condition, and it's more prevalent and more expensive than cancer, diabetes, and heart disease combined worldwide, and it's the #1 class of medications prescribed worldwide. And there isn't an institute at NIH for it, and there aren't a lot of vehicles to address it. And for whatever reason, the government just continues to make it worse. So I'm sorry you got diagnosed with that. That's really hard.
yeah. And
What does CRPS stand for?
complex regional pain syndrome type 2 means it's a known nerve injury. I had a recurrence of my rare cancer on the table for 13 hours, brachial plexus, stretched the entire nerve in the arm. And when I woke up, it didn't work. Functionality is returned, but I now have a neurological rewiring in my brain, and I feel this horrible pain all the time.
Yep.
And so
A third of all cancer patients are chronic pain patients. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Okay, I'll make a quick Susie exception. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sue Kartek.
Hey, Sue.
And I'm a pharmacist by trade. So fentanyl is legal, heroin is not. The reason heroin is not legal is because fentanyl is stronger than heroin.
Correct.
And I grew up in retail as a pharmacist during the Sadler domain, when the drug reps would come to the pharmacy and say, hey, we've got this MS content, you just take it twice a day, maybe 3 times a day, you never get addicted, you never feel pain, and look what's happened. And I'm friends with Dan, the pharmacist, if you'd like me to make that introduction. That kind of blew up the whole opioid epidemic.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people die. I know a lot of addicts. People would come into the pharmacy with fake prescriptions. I would do everything I could not to go to court because I was in court every week.
Yep.
It was an interesting time.
Wow, you were in court every week as a pharmacist.
Yes.
And what would the charge be? Were you what would you...
She was a witness. She'd be a witness. She's not a party to it.
Yeah, I had a gun in my back, held up. Guy had a Woody's bag and opened the safe and took all the drugs.
Yeah, and what's interesting is technology like Proove, some states are being forward-thinking and actually giving pharmacists who know a heck of a lot more about the medication than the doctors do, the ability to order that type of testing. Because, like, for example, at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, one of the reasons why they are so advanced is they put their pharmacists in charge of the chemotherapy rather than the oncologist. You know, in the cancer world, 75% of an oncologist's income is making money on chemotherapy, which is why every chemotherapy that's approved is always designed by pharmaceutical companies to be in addition to the previous ones, because you never want to take away the oncologist's income. You just want to add more and more drug. But the pharmacists actually understand how all this stuff works together. And so at St. Jude, the pharmacists are the ones who actually make those adjustments and those type of things, because St. Jude isn't trying to pump people with as much chemotherapy as possible and make a bunch of money like every other oncology group is. And by empowering the pharmacists can make the better decisions.
Are you fundraising? Are you accepting?
So the first time I funded it myself, obviously getting my clock cleaned in the divorce, and then the millions of dollars that I had to spend to clear my name kind of thing. Yeah, I'm raising a couple $1 million to get these things off the ground from people I know. So
Friends and family?
Friends and family and other people. Well, I mean, if someone wants to participate, we can talk. I don't know if I'll need it, but
What's your minimum investment?
oh, I'll take a small. I mean, it's got to be a 506c exception type situation, accredited investor, but we've got a convertible note that we're doing, so it can be small.
Let's pull together some money, folks. Put your hands together for my friend, Brian Meshkin.